argument, and some things that I think would kind of bolster it would be the two misconceptions that are commonly associated with the insanity defense. The first of those being this one right here. They are using the insanity defense to, quote, get away with their crimes, and we are letting murderers walk free. According to an article titled Insanity Defense FAQs, published by PBS in 2017, the insanity defense is actually only used in a little over 1% of all court cases, most of them being federal. And according to a study titled The Volume and Characteristics of Insanity by Lisa Callahan, published in the National Institute of Mental Health, the acquittal rate for insanity defense is only 26%, and only 50% of those are violent crimes. So the majority of the cases that come across the court aren't actually used for insanity, and the common misconception is that people are using them a lot more often than they actually are. This is partly due because to TV shows, crime shows, the media, considering that those are the ones that are typically portrayed in our society. So the fact that like murderers are being set free is actually completely untrue, and if they are to be set free, they would only be set into a mental institution. So this is partly due to the lack of understanding of the term not guilty by reason of insanity. This term basically means that you are guilty of your crime and you are responsible physically for it. However, mentally and emotionally, you are not found guilty. And so that's where the insanity part comes in. And so my argument is centered around the fact that if you are not guilty, you do serve out your sentence in a mental institution. According to an article titled Insanity Defense Updated in 2017 by Encyclopedia.com, approximately 95% of all people found not guilty by reason of insanity or who have used the insanity defense in their cases have in their lifetime or will be detained in a mental facility for whatever illness that they suffer from. So these illnesses are an issue for the people that are committing these crimes and are typically the reason why they do commit their crimes. Not necessarily like escaping them from responsibility, but rather providing that if they didn't have the disease, they would not have committed their crime. The second misconception has to do with a stigma around mental illness, and that's the fact that people think that they're faking their mental illness and that they aren't actually mentally ill, but rather just trying to get an acquittal and not have to serve any sentence for their crime. This misconception is partly due to the fact of the mental stigma that surrounds mental disease. In an article titled Criminal Law, published in December 15, 2015, published by the University of Minnesota Libraries Publishing, the most common examples of mental diseases that people use in insanity defenses are psychosis, schizophrenia, and paranoia. These three diseases are very difficult to diagnose, and they're very difficult to mask as well. Because of the severity of these illnesses, people tend to get into a psychotic state where they have delusions and tend to post signs of insanity, and all of these diagnoses and all mental diseases actually have to be diagnosed by a medical professional. And so for that reason, they can't really fake their diseases, and this misconception is actually partly due a lot to crime shows on TV and the fact that people think that because of these shows that's actually what is true in real life. However, majority of the time people are actually mentally ill and they use it for the proper reasons. The second reason for this is mostly due to the actual law aspect of it and the logistics part of it. In order to actually enter in a insanity defense plea, you have to have expert testimony from both sides, prosecution and defense, that both come to a consensus that the defense actually can be considered mentally ill. So this is one of the other reasons why this misconception tends to be untrue if we kind of follow my argument. It's also, like I said before, due to the stigma around mental health, which creates a fear among the mentally ill, and the fact that they don't want to ask for help because they don't want to be labeled crazy or insane or anything like that. In an article titled Top 10 Most Notorious Insanity Defense Cases by Gideon Young, published in April 11th, 2012, the jury for Jeffrey Dahmer actually came out with a statement saying that they contended that if a deranged criminal like Dahmer is rejected on an insanity plea, then they thought that any other criminal would be able to qualify for that defense and use that defense as an escape from their crimes. So even people who do have actual mental illnesses, like Jeffrey Dahmer was actually diagnosed with with psychopathia, which is like kind of a sociopath, but a little bit different. And he was also diagnosed with a bunch of other different mental diseases that stemmed from his childhood. However, the jury didn't want to hear that because they were too afraid of labeling crimes and bringing mental disease into the courtroom, which is kind of fostering the stigma that comes around mental health. So an understanding of mental illnesses helps to prove that they are not like faked easily, and this mental stigma has grown into such a taboo topic that people are almost afraid and scared of people that have mental illnesses. According to the World Health Organization World Health Report published in October of 2011, 1 in 4 people will actually be affected or have a mental disease in their lifetime. This mental disorders are not an uncommon thing in our society, and in fact, they are actually growing more rapidly, and more people are being diagnosed with them as we kind of steer away from the stigma around mental health. So this chart actually just kind of shows a couple of statistics that show that mental illnesses are not uncommon, and in fact, the more severe mental illnesses are the ones that we're focusing on a lot more, like schizophrenia, psychosis, and paranoia, the ones that are used most often in insanity defenses. According to an article titled Mental Health Myths and Facts published by the U.S. Department of Health in 2014, people suffering from mental illnesses are actually 10 times more likely to be the victim of a crime and not the perpetrator. So the stigma around mental health that people with mental diseases are scary or they commit crimes more often or they're violent is actually untrue. And for those reasons, a lot of times in insanity defense cases, the jury comes in with a premisconception that the person that committed the crime is naturally and innately violent, when in reality it's simply because of their mental disease that they are actually violent. So these stigmas prevent the people that are committing crimes from actually getting the help that they need, which should be the purpose of the insanity defense. It was created not to punish people for having their disease and not to say, you have a disease, so we're just going to quarantine you, but rather saying you have a disease, we recognize that you have the disease, and we want you to get the help that you need because we know that without having those mental diseases, you would not have done the things that you did. So, according to an article by Candace Madison in November 2010, posted by KLS Broadcasting, the Insanity Defense Reform Act of 1984 made it significantly more difficult to obtain a not guilty verdict and shifted the burden of proof for the insanity to the defense. So, not only do people have a more difficult time proving insanity, but the courts recognize that most of the misconceptions that we hold today involving insanity, mental illness, and the court of law do affect people's views of it. And so I want to revert back to the original purpose that I have for the insanity defense, which is not acquittal, which is not allowing people to walk free and escape from their crimes, but rather to get them help and acknowledge that their mental diseases are partly the reason for what they've done, and to instead have them serve out their sentence in a mental facility. So now you might be asking yourself, Alana, I'm not a lawyer, I don't want to go to law school, and I have no interest in doing that. So what can I possibly do for this issue? My answer comes in 2 parts. The first part is jury duty. Jury duty is probably one of the easiest ways to start learning about the judicial system and criminal law in general. And all of us in here are 18, 19 years old, and we have the ability to go to jury duty and serve out our summons. And according to the National Center for State Courts, in an article updated in 2016 titled Jury Management, 15% of adult Americans are actually summoned for jury duty per year. So the chances that you have of being able to do a jury sentence during your lifetime are actually a lot higher than in a lot of countries. And I highly recommend doing that so that you can not only avoid misconceptions about courts, but also kind of get to know a little bit more about the criminal justice system. The second thing that you can do is educate yourself about mental illness and kind of avoid the stigma that surrounds it. You can do this by participating in Cal Poly programs such as Buck the Stigma, which is centered around like fighting stigmas that are around mental illness and kind of making it a less of a taboo topic. But most importantly, empathy for the people that do have these diseases, especially criminals, because they can't help what their brains do. Thank you.